Okay, let's dive in. What if we could somehow practically guarantee a better start for every single child?
A better start.
Yeah. Imagine a system, and I know this sounds uncomfortable, but a system that screened potential parents.
Screen them. How?
Well, let's say based on some defined criteria. Could you support that? Even knowing it might mean some people, maybe even people you care about, are told, no, you're not fit to have kids.
Wow. Okay. Straight into the deep end.
Yeah.
Picture that world for a second. A number, a score, deciding something so fundamental.
Yeah.
That immediate, discomfort we all feel just thinking about it, that's worth thinking into, isn't it? What's that reaction actually telling us?
I know for me, my initial reaction has always been strong. Just no. It felt fundamentally wrong, pure evil almost.
Right, the visceral no.
But then
Yeah.
when you see things, you see a child who's clearly neglected, struggling, and this awful little thought creeps in. Like, what if? Could this specific suffering have been prevented?
That conflict, it's powerful.
Yeah.
Because we champion adult autonomy, the right to choose, massively important.
Absolutely.
But we also talk about a child's right to, well, a decent life, a nurturing environment. Are those two things always compatible? Or are we sometimes, maybe unconsciously, prioritizing the adult right over the child's outcome?
It's a clash of values, isn't it? And let's be real, we are constantly judging parents anyway, all the time.
Oh, constantly.
Social media is basically a judgment engine. School pickups, family dinners.
Yeah.
There's always that silent, sometimes not so silent, assessment going on.
Mm-hmm.
So is a formal test really such a radical leap?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it just making explicit, maybe even more brutal, what we already do informally?
That's a really interesting framing. And what if? What if the test wasn't just about, say, raw IQ? What if it was designed to predict things that are actually crucial for parenting?
Like what?
Like patience, empathy, the ability to handle stress, to nurture emotional well-being. Things that IQ doesn't necessarily capture. Would that change how you feel about it?
It definitely makes it harder to dismiss outright. I knew someone academically brilliant, like off the charts, smart,
Okay.
but with their own child. It was painful to watch. Almost like the child was an interesting problem to solve, not a person needing connection. There was a total lack of warmth, wisdom, maybe.
Exactly. It highlights that gap between intellect and, well, the stuff that actually matters in raising a human, which leads to maybe an uncomfortable question for you listening.
Go on.
Is your opposition to this whole idea based purely on principle? Or is there a tiny part of you deep down that's worried about where you might fall on such a scale?
Oof. Yeah, that hits close to home for probably a lot of us. That identity challenge.
It's natural to feel that, I think.
We have that saying, it takes a village to raise a child.
Yeah.
We love that saying.
Mm-hmm. It's comforting.
But what if the village gets a say? What if the village has a right to decide who gets to, add to the village population?
Yeah.
Puts a different spin on it.
And we have to be so careful here because history is just littered with warnings. The whole eugenics movement. Oh, God.
It was often framed in scientific, rational terms, determining who was fit to reproduce. It led to absolute horrors. We carry that historical guilt, or we should.
You absolutely cannot ignore that context. It's terrifying.
So think for a moment, personally. Picture the worst parent you can realistically think of. Someone you know or know of.
Okay. Yeah.
Got someone in mind.
Now, be honest with yourself. Would that child's world have been better if they hadn't become a parent?
Probably yes in this case.
Yes.
It's hard to say, but yeah.
But then the immediate next question is, who gets to make that call? Who on earth has the wisdom, the right, the authority to decide that for someone else?
Nobody you'd trust, probably. That's the problem.
It is, and it links to autonomy, doesn't it? My body, my choice is such a vital principle.
Absolutely fundamental.
But does that extend unconditionally to the choice to bring a life into the world that might face predictable, preventable suffering because the parent is simply unable to cope or provide?
It's a really tough parallel to draw, but you see the tension.
Huge tension. So here's a stark choice for you listening. Which world feels worse? One where, okay, some people are denied parenthood, a huge denial, but maybe significant abuse is prevented.
Okay.
Or a world like ours now, where every tragic case of child abuse or neglect stands as a kind of monument to our collective inaction on prevention.
Wow. Neither sounds good. That's a horrible choice.
It is. And think about licensing. We need a license to drive a car, own a gun, even to fish in some places.
Right.
Activities with risk.
Yeah, makes sense. Competence checks.
But for raising a human being, this profoundly complex, impactful responsibility, generally, no test, no license required, is that freedom? Or is it potentially negligence on a societal scale?
When you put it like that, it sounds less like freedom, more like, well, maybe an oversight. But the practicalities, they seem impossible.
Oh, the practicalities are a minefield. Who designs this test? What's the pass mark? What happens if you fail? Do you get support? Can you retest? Who pays for the kids whose parents are deemed unfit?
It just spirals into complexity and ethical nightmares, doesn't it?
Completely.
Yeah.
And it boils down to that core conflict. Fierce belief in individual liberty versus this deep conviction that every child deserves a fair shot.
Can they coexist? Always.
That's the multi-million-dollar question, isn't it? Maybe sometimes they just can't. Maybe we have to choose which value takes precedence in the hardest cases.
I remember hearing a social worker talk once, and it really stuck with me.
What did they say?
She said the cases that broke her heart the most weren't always the truly malicious parents, the ones intentionally harming their kids.
Okay.
It was often the ones who genuinely loved their children, desperately wanted to be good parents, but just lacked the capacity. The basic ability wasn't there. Overwhelmed, perhaps? Poorly equipped?
That distinction between love and actual ability is so crucial and often heartbreakingly clear in social work. Love isn't always enough, is it?
Sadly, no.
Hmm.
Which leads to another difficult thought. Maybe sometimes the most loving act a potential parent can perform is acknowledging their own limitations.
Saying, I can't give a child what they need right now, or maybe ever.
Yeah. Choosing not to have a child out of concern for that potential child's well-being, that takes incredible self-awareness and, frankly, courage.
It really does. And it contrasts sharply with how our society operates, doesn't it? We optimize everything, our workouts, our diets, our productivity hacks,
Oh yeah, life optimization is huge.
but suggest optimizing the conditions for raising the next generation. Suggest screening parents. Suddenly it's problematic, dangerous, dystopian. Why the resistance there?
Is it hypocrisy?
Yep.
Or just fear of where it leads? Probably both.
Be honest, though. You're walking down the street, you see a parent interacting with their child in a way that makes you wince. You judge. Silently, maybe. But you do. We all do.
Guilty. Absolutely. That internal monologue kicks in.
Now, imagine that fleeting judgment, that gut feeling of this isn't right, actually had the power to intervene, to potentially prevent future harm. Would you use it?
Putting it on the line, isn't it? Confronting our own inner judge and jury.
It is. Think back to that academically brilliant person you mentioned.
Yeah, the one who couldn't connect with his kid.
Right. Excelled in every measurable intellectual way, but failed at that fundamental human connection. What does that tell us about the value of IQ alone in the context of raising a child?
It tells me it's not the whole picture.
Yeah.
Not even close. Maybe not even the most important part.
Now, flip the script. Imagine you are the potential child, and your parent, the person who might raise you, fails this hypothetical screening. They're deemed unable to provide even a basic level of care.
Okay.
From that child's perspective, would you wish the screening had happened? Would you prefer not to have been born into that specific situation?
That's a powerful reframing. Puts you right in the vulnerable position. My gut says, as that child, yes, I prefer the screening happen.
It forces empathy, doesn't it? And it challenges that comfortable belief we often hold on to,
Right.
that fundamentally everyone is capable of being a good enough parent, that it's just inherent. Is that a genuine truth? Or is it maybe a kind of comforting societal delusion that stops us looking at the harder realities?
A delusion to avoid difficult conversations, perhaps.
But again, history pulls us back. State-sanctioned judgments on parental fitness.
Yeah.
Remember the legacy of institutionalizing kids, often based on poverty, not actual malice or incompetence.
Yeah, the unfit mother label slapped on poor women.
Yeah.
Devastating consequences.
Yeah.
We've definitely made terrible mistakes trying to fix this before.
Huge mistakes. Which makes you wonder, is the desire for a screening system really about child protection? Or does it maybe tap into something else in us?
Like what?
Like our society's anxiety about mediocrity, our desire for control in a messy world, maybe even a naive belief that suffering itself can be engineered away if we just find the right algorithm?
That's a pretty cynical take, but
Yeah.
maybe there's truth in it. That it's not as altruistic as it sounds.
So reflect on your own feelings right now. Are you strongly for this idea? Strongly against? Why? What fears or privileges might be shaping your reaction, separate from pure, objective morality?
It forces you to look inward, doesn't it? Beyond the immediate yes or no.
And I bet even after all this, a part of you still craves that simple answer. Yes or no, black or white.
Guilty again. We like certainty, even when it's not available.
But as, I think it was you or someone similar, implied trying to create perfect systems often leads to monstrous outcomes. The road to hell being paved with good intentions.
Right. The law of unintended consequences. So let me loop back then. We've explored the nuances, the history, the ethics. If, and it's a big if there was a scientifically solid, unbiased test that demonstrably reduced child suffering, would you still oppose it, knowing all the risks?
That remains the core dilemma, doesn't it? The potential benefit versus the potential for catastrophic misuse and injustice.
It really does.
And if this conversation has made you uncomfortable or angry or just deeply conflicted, maybe share it. Talk about it with someone whose opinion you respect, even especially if you know they'll disagree.
Test your own convictions against theirs.
Exactly. See how resilient those beliefs really are when challenged.
Okay, here's another angle. What if the reason some people react so viscerally against this idea, what if it's a deep-seated fear?
Fear of what?
Fear that society might actually be able to quantify something crucial for parenting, something beyond just love and good intentions, like the basic cognitive horsepower needed to manage the complexity of raising a child, and fear that maybe they wouldn't measure up.
Ooh, that's peeling back another layer. The fear of being found wanting in such a fundamental role. That's powerful.
Which brings us back to cruelty. What's more cruel? Denying someone the chance to be a parent, or knowingly or negligently allowing a child to be raised by someone fundamentally incapable of meeting their needs.
Both are cruel outcomes. There's no easy, less cruel option there, is there? It's a tragic choice either way.
We seem to approach parenting these days like an Instagram feed.
How do you mean?
Everything needs to look perfect, filtered, optimized.
Yeah.
We ignore the inherent messiness, the unpredictability, the sheer hard work involved in raising actual humans.
That's a great metaphor. We want the curated highlights reel, not the messy reality.
Imagine being a child and needing something vital, understanding, patience, safety, day in, day out for 18 years. And the person meant to provide it is just incapable, fundamentally cannot give it to you. Imagine the cumulative effect of that.
It's devastating to contemplate, just years of unmet needs.
So try this exercise. List the qualities you think make a good enough parent. Not perfect, just good enough.
Okay. Patience, empathy, resilience, basic organizational skills, consistency, warmth.
Right. Now, how many of those are truly measured by an IQ test? And how many are about will, love, persistence, things that are harder to quantify?
Very few are purely IQ, are they? Most fall into that other category, which complicates the test idea again.
It does. But maybe your unwavering commitment to parental freedom above all else, maybe it unintentionally allows you to overlook the kids who are really suffering right now because of parental inadequacy.
That's a challenging thought, that defending the principle might mean ignoring the victims of its potential failures.
I heard a teacher say once, it was heartbreaking. She said some kids arrive at school in the morning already looking defeated. Yeah. Like their light has already been dimmed by whatever's happening at home before the school day even starts. Whose fault is that? Who's responsible?
That paints a bleak picture and leads to bigger questions about societal cost, right?
Exactly. What are the long-term costs, economic, social, emotional, of generations raised by parents who are just overwhelmed or ill-equipped? Who picks up that tab?
We all do, eventually, through healthcare, social services, the justice system.
Yeah.
The costs are diffused, but they're massive.
And we assume, don't we, a sort of baseline competence in the general population for parenting.
We kind of have to, right, to function.
But what if that assumption is wrong? What if a fair assessment showed a level of unpreparedness or lack of capacity that's actually disturbingly common? Would we even want to know that?
That would be a profoundly destabilizing truth for society to face. Would we rather maintain the illusion?
And remember, it doesn't take outright malice to cause harm.
No, absolutely not.
Just being constantly stressed, having zero support, feeling completely unable to cope, that can be just as damaging to a child as intentional cruelty. Could some kind of assessment predict vulnerability to those factors?
Maybe, but then you get into predicting future behavior based on current states, which is ethically tricky. And who sets the bar? Who decides what intelligent enough or capable enough means?
A government committee. Scientists.
Yeah.
Academics. The potential for bias, for creating a new kind of class system based on cognitive scores. It's enormous.
A cognitive caste system for reproduction. Chilling.
It reminds me, I used to think education was the key. Surely more educated people make better parents, right?
Seems logical on the surface.
But I've seen enough highly educated, successful people be absolutely terrible, emotionally stunted, even cruel parents to know that intelligence isn't empathy, it isn't kindness.
No correlation necessarily, which brings in maybe a Jungian idea.
Go on.
How much bad parenting is just? The unconscious playing out, unexamined trauma from the parent's own childhood being repeated generation after generation without awareness.
Wow. The cycle of trauma. That feels incredibly relevant.
Yeah.
And hard to measure with any test.
Very hard. So we know kids are suffering now. We know it intellectually, statistically. We feel it emotionally when we see those news stories. And yet this potential, albeit flawed solution screening, triggers this massive no. What does that disconnect mean? The gap between knowing the problem and rejecting a potential, if dangerous, solution.
Is it just fear of the slippery slope? Or something deeper?
Think about a time you took on something big. A job, a project, maybe even a relationship, and felt totally out of your depth, overwhelmed.
Yeah, definitely felt that.
Now, imagine that feeling as how a child experiences being raised, constantly feeling like the person in charge is drowning. What does that do to a developing psyche?
It's terrifying. It creates deep insecurity, probably.
So there's no easy out here. Path A, risk discrimination, abuse of power, unjust denial of rights. Path B, allow preventable harm, neglect, abuse to continue happening to vulnerable children.
It feels like an impossible choice.
Yes.
A true dilemma.
It might be. And maybe our reaction, strong feelings for or against, says less about the idea itself and more about our own discomfort.
It's comfort with what?
With acknowledging that maybe, just maybe, some people are genuinely better suited for certain fundamental human roles than others. And that's a hard thing for an egalitarian society to admit.
Ouch. Yeah, that goes against the grain, doesn't it? The idea that not everyone starts at the same baseline capability for everything.
So put yourself in the hot seat again. If some objective, fair system deemed you unfit, where would your loyalty lie? Your right to parent? Or the potential well-being of the child you might raise?
That's a brutal personal question. I hope I prioritize the child, but the pull of wanting to be a parent is so strong. It's hard to know for sure, honestly.
It's deeply personal, and maybe the outright refusal to even discuss ways to mitigate the worst parenting outcomes, however flawed those ways might be, maybe that's a kind of societal cowardice.
An unwillingness to face the ugliest possibilities.
Perhaps. An unwillingness to get our hands dirty with difficult solutions because the risks are too high, even while children are actively suffering.
Let's raise the stakes. Hypothetically, you knew with absolute certainty someone would severely harm their child, abuse them badly.
Okay. Horrible premise, but okay.
Yeah. And the only indicator beforehand, the only warning flag, however imperfect, was the result of some parental screening test. Would you ignore it? Would you say, principles matter more?
That forces the issue, doesn't it? Certainty of harm versus an imperfect warning. I don't know if I could ignore it then. Could you?
I don't think I could either. Which implies the principle isn't absolute when faced with guaranteed harm.
It suggests the line might be blurrier than we like to admit. And sometimes clinging to the idea that everyone can parent well is a privilege, often held by those who haven't seen the darkest corners of what can happen.
That's a tough, but maybe fair point.
How will future generations look back on us? On our debates, our hand-wringing about slippery slopes while, kids were actually falling off cliffs in real time?
Will they see us as principled or paralyzed by fear?
Maybe the most intelligent response, ironically, is admitting we don't have a perfect ethical solution here, that any path forward is fraught with danger and compromise.
Acknowledging the complexity and the lack of easy answers.
And acknowledging our own part. I mean, I catch myself judging parents. We talked about that feeling of, I'd do it better. It's arrogant, isn't it? It underestimates the sheer difficulty.
It really does. We're all complicit, in a way, in a system that fails kids sometimes. Dismissing this whole conversation as just monstrous might be part of the problem, a way to avoid wrestling with it.
Exactly. Remember that initial question, guaranteeing a good start. Maybe the problem isn't the screening. It's the idea that we can even define a good start adequately, let alone enforce it fairly. Who gets to be the arbiter of good?
That power.
Yeah.
It's terrifying. The line between protection and tyranny is, as they say, razor thin.
And often crossed by those most convinced they're doing the right thing.
It definitely leaves you thinking, leaves you unsettled.
And maybe that's the point. If this deep dive felt uncomfortable, maybe listen again. That feeling might just be the sound of grappling with something genuinely important and difficult.
Yeah. And if it challenged you, share it, talk about it, especially with people who see it differently. That's where the real learning happens, right?
Absolutely. Test those beliefs.
This has been The Deep Dive We don't aim for easy answers.
We aim to open the doors to the conversations we'd maybe rather avoid. Thanks for listening.